Good morning. Welcome to the Conversation Hub with me, Tanya Lee, and Volker Beluda from Robotus. The next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about what is emotional intelligence, why is it really important as a leader to have emotional intelligence. We will stop and pause at the end for any questions, but if you've got questions as we go throughout, just pop it in the chat and we will get to them at the end. So as I say, my name's Tanya Lee. I'm partner at Culture Works Consortium and founder of Emperor Coaching. I'm passionate about working with leaders to enable them to reach their full potential. And part of that is getting to them to understand what emotional intelligence is and to develop their skills in that. I'm going to pass you over to Volker so he can do a quick intro himself, and then we'll crack on to the emotional intelligence conversation. Volker, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya, and good morning, everyone. So, if I say it's still a cold March morning here, where I'm sitting just north of Brighton. So I work as a sales leadership coach, executive coach, and fractional sales consultant. So, do a lot of work with emotional intelligence, and I don't know if it's a teaser or not, but I just got qualified for EQI 2.0 assessment last week. So I'm in the weeds of emotional intelligence at the moment, and I absolutely love it.
You've been immersing yourself in EI this week.
I have been, and it's quite a journey actually. So I did my master thesis on so back at uni many years ago on emotional intelligence. And originally I was thinking, it's a common sense approach. Everyone should be emotional intelligent in the workplace. How can someone not be emotional intelligent? But little did I know, right?
And I think, it's really important to talk about this because actually for a leader, EI and EQ, and I think we'll get to what EI and EQ and the difference a bit later on, is that secret sauce. It's much more important to be emotionally intelligent than it is to be intelligent. So if it'd be great to start with what emotional intelligence is actually, Volker. So do you want to talk about what emotional intelligence is? I know we've got a slide up here, but it'd be great for you to walk through that.
See, I can read off the slide, right? Because I love that definition, because it says emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and influence your own emotions, but also the emotions of others. And that's why I think where emotional intelligence is so important in the workplace or in personal relationships as well, right? Because it starts with your own emotions, right? What feelings do you have? What emotions are coming up, right? When you're stressed, when you're under pressure, when you start talking to someone, right? Whatever the situation is. And then being able to actually say, okay, there is a feeling, first of all, then understand what does that feeling, what do these emotions actually mean? And I like to use that example of a former colleague. I don't know if he's listening or not, but he used to throw a fax machine through the office, right? I mean, so many years ago on a Friday afternoon because he was so stressed. But, he clearly didn't manage or understand his emotions at all. And then how can you influence those? And then how can you project that onto others, right? So how can you, particularly as a sales leader, right? The empathy you have with others, right? And understand other people's emotions, read other people. And that's what, it's as simple as that. And that's what emotional intelligence is all about.
And as you say, it's as simple as that. But actually, it isn't that simple because we don't have it. It's a skill that we develop. Some of us are more naturally predisposed to it. Others, we need a bit of work. And it's like anything, any skill, we don't become good at it by accident. We have to keep practicing it and we have to be aware. And I know, I love that, I agree. It's that recognize, understand, manage, influence your own emotions, and then manage the emotions of others, understand that. And I think for me, the biggest part of that is that self-awareness.
Yeah, I'd agree. But you know what you just said is so important. And I don't know if people picked up on it. It's a skill.
Mm.
And you know what it means if it's a skill. I mean, you know that. You can
Yeah.
learn it. You know, the beauty of emotional intelligence is we can all learn it. Not like IQ, as you said earlier, right? We're all born
Mm.
with a certain IQ. We might lose a few brain cells, you know, as we grow up and go partying or play sports or whatever. But you know, IQ is given. You know, there's little you can do to really increase it. But EQ you can actually learn, and you know, it's a skill, and that's a beauty. Sorry,
Yeah.
self-awareness. I let you take that away.
No, absolutely. You know, for me, self-awareness is the biggest thing as a leader we need to develop. And that's the key part of emotional intelligence. If we don't have self-awareness, we don't have that ability to recognize that emotion, how could then we understand, manage, and influence our emotions?
Yeah.
You know, it comes from that fight, flight, fold, your cave person brain, where we didn't actually you know, fight, fight, fold was there to protect us, and it's rightly there to protect us. We didn't walk down the street going, "Hey, hairy mammal, really great to meet you," because we knew we needed to fight or fold to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence is taking that pause and recognizing what emotion am I feeling. Is it a protection motion? Or what will be the impact of me showing that emotion immediately?
Yeah. It's funny that you said that, right? We weren't walking through the savannah, right? And speak to the saber-toothed tiger and go like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" Right? What are you doing here? What is
Yeah.
your purpose?
We probably had a very real emotion of fear, and we needed to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting one, Volker, because we all feel
Yeah.
or experience emotions in very different ways, right? And that first part of self-awareness is recognizing where you feel that emotion.
Yeah.
I know I feel it in my tummy. Where do you feel it?
Mainly in my tummy, but
Mm.
you know, we sometimes when we're anxious or feel fear, you know, it can be in the whole body as well, right? Or when we feel
Yeah.
depressed, you know, and there's some great work been done on that. So in my, if I say, I learned it in my mindfulness course. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but Daniel Goleman, who popularized emotional
Mm.
intelligence in the 90s, he even wrote in a book called Search Inside Yourself, the mindfulness program they developed at Google, which they couldn't sell as mindfulness to their employees. They had to sell it as Search Inside Yourself. So the engineers were like, "Oh, this is quite interesting."
Yeah.
So mindfulness and emotional intelligence are kind of like this two sides of the same coin. And you know, mindfulness works a lot with self-awareness.
Mm.
And so Gorman, I now lost my track which point I tried to make, but Gorman, yeah, Gorman. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say to anyone, if you're starting off your emotions, there's loads of stuff out there. I think we'll come to the EQs, EI stuff later, but Goleman's a great starting point for learning about emotional intelligence. He talks about that self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, social skills. You know, how do we manage all that? And I think, you know, it's worth talking about if you are in a business or if you are a leader. The question is, well, why should I develop this skill? What's the point of it? And there's loads of stats out there to tell us why we should be. And I'm just going to flick to the next slide. There is a huge impact in high IEI in leadership.
Yeah.
You know, 90% of top performers have high EI. That, if nothing else, this is why we should be developing our EQ and EI. And the difference, I think, between EI and EQ is the EI is actually that ability to recognize, understand, and manage, and your EQ is how good you are at it. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
I'd say so. I mean, a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. to be honest, my master's thesis, I wrote all about EQ. I didn't even mention it as EI.
Yeah.
I think EQ is more, as you say, right? It's like IQ, right? It's like EI is the general intelligence we talk about, whilst EQ is actually the emotional quotient. And that's something you can measure through assessment like the EQI assessment, right? So the one I've just done last week, which for if I say leaders or even individuals who want to find out what is my EQ and where can I improve my EQ, you get a subset of 15. So they're 5 pillars, so similar to Goleman's pillars. They're a little bit, if I say, more corporate focus, more management focus, more leadership focus, and you then get a breakdown of 15 sub points, sub pillars, if you like, and they all interrelate. It's really interesting. If you want to go into the data, it's a bit geeky, but I kind of like that. And you can then find where do you need to improve. Is it independence? Is it your self-awareness? Etc. So it's so interesting to go in there and look at stress reduction, for instance, as well, right? I still have forgotten my point I wanted to make with the mindfulness earlier, but
it'll come back at some point, Volker. But these stats to me, really resonate with me as a leader, and I think I wasn't particularly great at the EQ stuff. The EIEQ stuff at the beginning of my leadership journey, and actually we talk about the difference between hard and soft skills, and it comes from the army, where hard skills were your cavalry, your machinery, etc., and your soft skills were those social skills, those managing relationships effectively. Actually, as I went through my leadership journey, there was a massive switch between those hard skills to those soft skills, and actually the importance of bringing people with you.
Yeah.
And the only way as a leader that you can bring people with you is if you are aware of the impact of what you are doing, what you are saying, and how you show up with your emotions, and also understanding other people.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And that's where, it becomes such a basic thing, actually, if you think about it, for organizations. I worked in organizations where we literally had to drag the leadership team onto the shop floor to talk to the teams, right? I think that shouldn't happen. And it's building trust in organizations, right? It's understanding other people, understanding their needs. It has a whole cultural impact that that goes beyond, if I say, just day-to-day work, right? Ultimately, and as you know, right, my background is in sales. I work with a lot of sales leaders. It has an impact on revenue. People are happier, they're more trusted, they're more autonomously, they're working better, they're intrinsically motivated, which was a big point for Goleman around motivation, right? To intrinsically motivate someone.
And actually this week I've been talking a lot about listening without judgment, and that emotional outpouring that we have when something triggers us. So for me, that recognition of what triggers me and where do I feel it and what does that look like? I know for me that fear and anger, I feel very similarly. They feel really similar. And I have to take a pause to recognize which one I'm feeling. And whether it's a legitimate feeling or just that gut response. I'm sure we've all been driving along in our cars, if we're drivers, and somebody has cut us up. And we have just let a flurry of abuse come out. Actually, it's not used for anyone. I've heightened my emotions in a way that isn't serving me well. And actually has no impact on that other driver at all. They've gone. They're off. And actually some of the things that emotional intelligence has helped me with have been in my personal life as well as my work life.
Yeah.
I now very much sit in a traffic jam, and whilst I recognise that I feel anxious that I may be late, I manage, and this is some of my management, I manage it by saying, do you know what? I am not the person that's broken down. I am not the person that's in that crash. So what management tools do you have, Volker, to manage your emotions? What do you use?
I mean, the example you just brought up is brilliant, right? Because everyone can practice that.
Yeah.
Because we have this instinct straight away. We are the best drivers, right? Everyone else is driving is rubbish, right? And they don't know what they're doing. So as soon as someone cuts across, you go like, that outburst. But we all know that, right? And actually, there's a great Instagram post or video somewhere on Instagram. Probably watch too much Instagram, but there's a chap, a taxi driver, and he stayed totally calm when someone shouted at him, and his guest said, "So why do you stay so calm?" Because everyone has to shout at someone, and I can just take it, right? But it's realizing in these situations, how do you react, right?
Yeah.
When my kids are now teenagers, right? So it's slightly different. But when they were younger and they totally drove you potty, right? How do you manage that? Do you shout at them? And I would say that the first few times I shouted at them, and then I got more mellow, if mellow is the right word here, right? But I managed to control my emotions more. But even these days, right, it's funny actually, every Tuesday night, and I don't know if that's because what I do on a Tuesday, I get really agitated around 6, 7 o'clock, and then I make dinner, and it's just, everything is just getting too much for me. Being able to realize that I cannot have a very in-depth conversation with my family over dinner, that I might be a bit jumpy, that I might just have to take myself, away from a situation.
Yeah.
Take a bit of breathing, breathing exercise always help to calm you down, right? Things like that. I just, just realizing, again, what you said earlier, the self-awareness, that's where it starts. How do you regulate your emotions? How do you regulate your impulses? And we have that in the workplace, right? And you don't want to work with someone who, let's say you didn't hit target. Let's say you hit target 90% of your target. You don't want to say it's manager going in and go like, big old outburst, right? On a Friday afternoon. Can you come to my office? And nothing else.
Yeah.
It's just, and people still do. And it astonishes me, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's, we talked about it's a starting point, self-awareness. Right? We can't go anywhere with EQ unless we develop our self-awareness. So naming the emotion we feel, and this is what I quite often work with leaders, and I know you do, Volker, because we've had this conversation, is getting people to think about when they feel the emotion and where they feel it. And naming that emotion. So what is going on for me at the moment? And then putting in some strategies to help manage those emotions in an effective way. So it's fine to say, I feel quite angry about something, to express that. But if you just scream at people, it has a very different feeling. So putting those, what are your tips and tools for putting things into managing? And I use a lot of breath work.
Yeah.
So actually going back to your mindfulness conversation, in that moment, can I take a pause? Can I take a deep breath and really recognize what I'm feeling, and what do I have to manage that feeling and manage that outburst of emotion? And breath work's really important to me. And I talk to people very rarely notice if you just take a deep breath.
I was about to say, they don't. No. You just demonstrated it there.
People just don't notice. We think it's massive, but actually just taking a deep breath makes a massive difference to managing that emotions. It slows our heart rate down. It slows our mind down. actually, if you can use breath work, there's some great techniques called box breathing, where you breathe in and breathe out and hold for 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
Really 6 minutes. I don't think we've got time to do that. But that is one of my biggest things around managing my emotions.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a mindfulness practitioner, and so I meditate daily. So just grounding yourself once a day massively helps with your emotional regulation. And if you look at Viktor Frankl, which I'm sure you're aware of, right? He so nicely said, right, between stimulus and response is a gap, right? And that gap, you use that gap. You can take a pause, or slow things down, just whilst you're thinking, and you don't have to react. I mean, we have a conversation, but you're not forcing me to answer, right? Do you know what I mean? So just because you're angry doesn't mean you have to react in an angry way, right? Take yourself away, go to the bathroom, do a mini, three-step breathing exercise, or the 3-minute breathing space, as it's called by Mark Williams, is a great, 3-step exercise for calming yourself down. And you can do it over 3 minutes, as the original name suggested, or 30 seconds. That's all it takes.
Yeah, there's lots of things, sometimes it is a case of just taking a pause, taking a walk, taking a breath, removing yourself from that situation for a while. But then also that third step of actually, how do we use our emotions to fuel that goal-directive behaviour? I've actually been to PT at 7 a.m. this morning. I go to the gym, I have a personal training session, and I use my frustration in my ability to do something to fuel myself to do it more. But sometimes, and I know it's a cognitive stop, so I'm very aware that it's a cognitive stopping me doing something. I take a breath, I close my eyes. Some people use visualization. And actually, it's around how do we use those emotions to drive goal-directed behavior in a way that makes sense. We've understood them, we've managed them, and then we use them in the way that's most effective.
Yeah. So my motivation to go to the gym is slightly different. So I'm not trying to use my anger or my aggressions, as a boxing bag, but I used to. It's a great outlet. It's a much, much better outlet than throwing a fax machine through an office, or shouting at people, and it's just this letting be, and it's all right, and to be honest, that's what you do in meditation, in focus meditation, right? You have thoughts that come, and you let them go, right? And that's what you're practicing. You have these thoughts, these feelings coming up. Just let them go. Everything's going to be all right. It's a great book. I'm reading, I'm listening to at the moment, about self-talk and positive and negative self-talk. So I just started it this week. So that's what I do in the gym, fueling my brain, and but it's great, right? In terms of rewiring your brain, right? And understanding, what you have to tell yourself to be more positive, to be more successful, rather than going into the old patterns, the old synapses in your brain, but starting to do new neurological connections, right? So neuroplasticity. And that could be a topic for another talk. So
it still reminds me, if you carry the same bricks, you will build the same house. So it's around that changing of what we do. And absolutely, my frustration is usually out of what I can't do at the gym, when my trainer is going, come on, you've got this, and I'm thinking, no, I haven't. And then having that emotion of frustration that drives me being able to do it. So it's been a really positive thing. Conscious we've got 5 minutes left, so let's just wander through how EI helps leaders to navigate challenges, and actually, why do leaders fall down if they don't have EI? It's very clear here, Volker. the positive, right?
So my most favorite one there is actually on there. It's, if I say it is pretty much on there. It's decision making. There we go. Second from the bottom. So I should have known that slide, right? It's decision making. Because we often make decisions just purely on logic, right? And ignoring our emotions. Or we have an unconscious bias, right? Is that emotional or is that cognitive? We can argue. But being aware of your unconscious bias, being aware of your gut feeling, and being aware of all the data and the logic, right? You can then make a better and more informed decision.
Yeah.
When you have a high level of empathy, you're taking other people's emotions and feelings into considerations as well, right? So once of a sudden, as a leader, you start making better decisions, and you're looking at decisions that are more beneficial for your team, for the people you work with. So that's a big one for me from an emotional intelligence perspective. But of course, if we're looking at the list, stay calm and focused under pressure. That's where mindfulness comes in, right? Managing conflicts, again, that's where mindfulness comes in. Empathy, being confident in your decisions, in your feelings, in mediating. I don't want to go through all of them. You can pick a few as well, but
I think one of my my most hated phrases is treat everyone as you want to be treated yourself. The intent is brilliant. The intent is really positive, but we're actually all very different. So that awareness of self and that awareness of others, for me, is that key part of EI and EQ, having a high EQ. Because that is where you start to really build teams and bring them with you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you build the trust, right? And once you build the trust, what I said earlier, you get the motivations, intrinsic motivation, because people, come on their own. They flourish, and so massive to change a whole culture around that, especially working from home, right? I worked with a leader. I'm still working with her, and there are few people in the company. They're not intrinsically motivated. They, if you don't literally tell them what to do and order them to the office from 9 till 5, they're not going to do any work. And I say that there are two ways of solving that, right? One is changing the culture and trying to get them on board, or they're the wrong people. Obviously, decisions here. But it's, I think if you get people on board properly, that will never happen, right?
Yeah.
And once a culture is down, it takes some time, takes really a lot of effort to get it back up. But it's worth it. It's worth the effort to build that trusting culture and get everyone on board.
Yeah. Well, Volker, as always, I've really enjoyed chatting to you. We could talk for ages on EI, EQ, mindfulness. But I just want to really end it with that, going back to that beginning when we talked about it is a skill. It's a muscle like anything else, and we can build that skill. We're not going to be great unless we start to practice it. So anyone who is starting in their EIEQ journey, I get them to work on their self-awareness initially, and then everything else can start to follow that, because we're not aware, we can't actually do anything with it. And as Volker said earlier, he is now qualified on the next level to do what is it, EI?
It's called EQI 2.0 and EQ 360. Yeah. So basically, if you think of a DISC test, or that kind of psychometric test, but solely focusing on emotional intelligence, and what you look at different areas, 15 areas in terms of how you can improve your EQ, and then you can look at it from a team perspective as well. That's where it gets really interesting. So if you have, I don't know, 3 peers, 2 managers, and you have, people that report into you, maybe even customers if you wanted to, how do they see you and what can you improve? And it gets really complex and really interesting. So huge tool for anyone who wants to build an organization or themselves to be more emotional intelligent. Enough of a plug here.
Well, everyone, thank you very much for listening, either live or on playback. And if you've got anything that you want to feedback or any other subjects you'd like to see, please go to cultureworksconsortium.com and let us know. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.